Welcome, friends, to Hebrew Nation and the Bride of Christ podcast. We've been considering various topics as part of the wedding, and today we're going to answer several questions. Where's the wedding? How do we get there? And why not a rapture? Well, the wedding is in the covenant. That's when God took Israel from Egypt to Sinai. It was Pentecost at Sinai, and he said, if you keep my covenant, you'll be a kingdom. And they said, we'll do it. They probably should have said, we can only do it if you write it in our hearts, because their hearts were, they didn't know the wickedness in their own hearts, it says in Jeremiah 17 chapter. And that should be our response too. God, we can't do this without your help. But we can become the bride of Christ, I believe, in a spiritual sense, if we are that way, and that's what the wedding parables are about. Sadly, they also illustrate the fact that we don't get it. The Matthew 25, all 10 virgins, even the wise, were asleep with their lights out. That implies we don't understand, or we would be sharing the light with others, because this is high reward. In Luke 12th chapter, it's the very highest possible reward. It says in verse 44, he will make us ruler over all that he has if we are so doing. So doing what? It means to be ready, and the conditions we're not understanding, basically. The clues point to Passover timing. The midnight cry in Matthew 25, verse 6, the cry at midnight, there was a cry made. Well, that midnight cry goes back to Egypt at Passover, when death fell on the Egyptians and a great cry went up from Egypt in Exodus 12, verses 28, 29, something like that. So each wedding parable implies that. In Luke 12, Peter asks, is this parable for us or for everyone? He didn't know. And in Matthew 22, the king makes a marriage for his son, and he sends his servants to bid people to a wedding. And the invitation of the king is scorned and ridiculed. Well, why would you scorn the king's invitation? It must be something we're not understanding. And I want to try to explain that. But how do we get there is obscure, but we have to piece together the pieces of prophecy to understand how we get there. Basically, we see when Christ was asked about the end of the world, Yeshua, he said to study the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, we find the 8th chapter, there is a vision at the time of the end, which has a ram and a goat conflict. The ram is pushing from the Middle East, pushing north into Russia, really, and south into Africa, west to Europe and the New World. And it angers a goat that comes flying from the west and stomps this ram and breaks its horns. In verse 20, it says the horns are the kings of Media and Persia. But today you would say Iraq and Iran. Those are the areas. Lots of people understand that Persia is Iran, and Media is where Iraq was, so that basically this vision is half fulfilled. I'm sure we are going to war. I predicted war with Iraq before 9/11 based on this imagery, and I'm sure we're going to go to war with Iran. In fact, hostilities began on October 7 with Hamas, but they've escalated to the point where in Abib, the month of Passover, Iran sent 300 missiles and drones over to Israel, not as a gift, but militantly. And so things are escalating, and I just recently saw that Netanyahu is saying that war with Hezbollah is next. So it's going to come where Zechariah 14th chapter says, the day of the Lord comes. And I'm seeing that phrase misunderstood by many pastors who think that's when Christ comes in the sky. Okay, but really, if you look back on Egypt, and by the way, Ecclesiastes 3:15 in the New English Bible says, "What is has been already. What is to come has been already. God summons each event back in his turn. So we're going to see some of those events repeat themselves in our time. And we want to be ready for it and understanding. And Passover was the time when God afflicted Egypt with judgment. When God said, I will execute judgment, he said, this is night of the Lord. Well, as day follows night, the end time judgment is going to be bigger than what happened at nighttime then. I think it will involve the whole world, and we can expect that it's related to the vision I said about the ram and the goat. The militancy of Islam against Jews is clear, and we think those Jews are just, they're there because of God. Well, a Messianic Jew explained to me that 90% of the Jews in Israel today have no interest in their spiritual heritage. They're just there for free land that the UN gave them. And it wasn't really the UN's land to give. It was God's land. He gave it to Abraham for his seed. And Paul says in Galatians 3:29, last verse of Galatians 3, it says, if you're Christ's, you're Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. So really, that's our land over there. And they're fighting over it, but I believe God is going to clear the way, as he did in Exodus 34th chapter, verse 10 and 11. He says, behold, I make a covenant with you, and it's a terrible thing I'm going to do with you. I'm going to drive out the Canaanite. Now, if he would do it for them, he has to do it for us. He's not a respecter of persons, and we can go there believing that things will work out when the right time comes, and it's getting close. But he's going to let the Muslims drive the unbelieving Jews out. 90%, as this fellow said, is a Rabbi Weiss, said that no interest in spiritual heritage. 8% are Orthodox Jews that hate Christians, would spit on Christ. Not good. And we're going to see God get them out of there. And it will be a shock to lots of people who think God brought them there. He fulfilled his word. Well, if you really look at the Torah, in Leviticus, the 26th chapter, God said to Israel, if you walk contrary to me, I'll punish you 7 times over. And they did. They walked contrary to him, and we most of us know Ezekiel 4, verse 5 and 6. It's easy, 4, 5, 6. That Ezekiel's asked to lie on his side 390 days, each day for a year, that Israel was in apostasy, which tells you they were in apostasy for 390 years. Times 7 from Leviticus 26, and it's 2,730 years that they were to be in exile. And Sennacherib came in 722 BC, before the Christian era, and he took them, the 10 northern tribes, captive back to Damascus, and God scattered them among the nations. It says so in Jeremiah 31, verse 8, he that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. Well, so he scattered them, but he's going to gather us. In Jeremiah 30, verse 3, it says, lo, the days come, saith the Lord, I'll bring again the captivity of my people, Israel and Judah, and cause them to return to the land that I gave their fathers, and they shall possess it. Verse 11 says, I'm with you to save you, though I make a full end of all other nations. I will not make a full end of you. So guess what? Big stuff is coming, and I don't want to be here in America when the full end is made. It's not going to be pretty. I want to be with the kingdom that God is going to set up in the land of the covenant. And we can do that and be there. He promised to gather us. In Jeremiah 31, he said he will bring us from the north country, which is Babylon, gather us from the coasts, the lame, the blind, the woman with child. A great company will return there. And he that scattered Israel will gather him and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. And your children will come again to their own border. They'll come again from the land of the enemy, verses 16 and 17. And that's the chapter of the new covenant. In verse 31, I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel, the house of Judah, and I'll write my law in their hearts. basically that implies that we will then do what we want to do, and it will be the right thing. If His law is in our hearts, we will want to do the law, and we can live for Him and glorify Him in the end time when things will be at their worst. I think God needs a special group of people to vindicate His law, which Satan, the devil, the deceiver, Lucifer, said it was unfair and unkind, and he was thrown out of heaven for his rebellion against the law. But God let Christ die to show the law can be kept. It's not too difficult. Nobody is sticking a gun to our head saying you got to steal or kill or commit adultery or do anything. It's our choice of how we live. And if we listen to the devil, we will be lost. But if we close our minds to the devil and claim God's promises, we can live well and be saved through the end time, to be, I think, among the 144,000 who get to follow Christ wherever He goes in eternity. High privilege and reward in the wedding parable, also seen in Luke 12, verse 36 says, "Be ready when I come and knock, that when I knock you open immediately. Blessed are those servants whom the Lord finds watching when He comes. He will gird Himself, make them sit down to eat, and serve them." Well, that's what He did at the Last Supper. So this has, I think, Passover timing, except that I think the disciples understood that. And when Christ said, "You don't understand," each time He said it, He gave them an example that fit a provision. I call it a 9/11 provision, because 9/11 gets our attention. That's when big stuff happened in New York City. But the 9/11 provision is Numbers 9, verse 10 and 11, where if a man, an Israelite, took a long trip and he couldn't get back in time for Passover, he was not excused. He was to keep it a month later, in the second spring month. And it also just happens to be the time of Noah. When Noah entered the ark, it was in the second spring month that the flood had Passover timing. And Noah entered the ark on the 10th day. That was the same day that the sacrifice was selected in Egypt. In Exodus 12, verse, let's see. Yeah, it was verse 10. It was on the 10th day. Maybe it wasn't the 10th. Yeah, I think it was the 10th verse. Sorry, I don't know for certain, but you can look it up. Exodus 12, verse 10. On the 10th day, you set aside a sacrifice. Oh, it's verse 3. Sorry, Exodus 12, verse 3. On the 10th day, you set aside a sacrifice, and the flood came on the 15th day. I'm sorry, the 15th day. Would have been Passover, but 2 days later on the 17th is when the flood came. I don't really understand, except that Noah was told a week from now it'll be, the flood will come, okay? So anyway, we need to be prepared for end time events to match those, because I believe the Jewish economy is full of instruction for us, and those sacred feast days show us that at the time appointed, one would come to whom the ceremony pointed. And I was disappointed this spring. Some things happened, but apparently the Muslims are not ready to attack Jerusalem yet. I still see a possibility of it coming up to Pentecost, because Pentecost is a turning point for a special prophecy, and I'll tell you about that now, since we appear to be there. A friend of mine who taught Bible or religion in a Bible college, coined the term twice speak code, because he said when God speaks something twice, it's once in history and once again at the end of the world. And if so, there are passages, and I'm telling you one now that comes from music that we like at Christmas time, the Messiah, Handel's Messiah, and it's based on Haggai 2. Once in a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth, the sea, the dry land, all nations, and the desire of all nations will come. Well, the desire of all nations, I think, is Christ's kingdom. We want that. Everybody would want that. It will be wonderful. But the earthquake is mentioned twice. It's in Haggai 2, verse 6, and verse 22, 21 and 22, I believe. And 3 times it has a date of all things. It's the 9th month and 24th day when the foundation of the temple was laid. And a lot of people may think, well, that's for the third temple, you know. Well, I don't think so. I don't think God is going to allow a third temple where they're going to do animal sacrifices for Jews, okay? Because that's an affront to Christ, who was the sacrifice. He adequately fulfilled it. He is the only sacrifice that could. The Lamb typified him in Isaiah 3. And the Jews aren't reading Isaiah 53, nor were they reading Daniel 9, verses 24 and 5 to the Messiah. 70 weeks, 69 weeks to the Messiah. It was weeks of years in their time, but I believe in the end time it's weeks of days, literal time for us to see how we get to the 9th month and 24th day of the month, which is said 3 times in Haggai 2, verse 10, 18, and 20. Okay, so when you have a line of time, 70 weeks, and one end is on the 9th day and 24th month, count backwards the 70 weeks, and it happens to be Pentecost. How do you like that? That's awesome, I think. And we aren't to Pentecost yet for this year. But if sometime between now and July 15, if you take the second Passover timing, which Christ said, you don't understand, it's like the days of Noah, it's like a man traveling to a far country. You take the 9/11 timing of second month, and you go the Feast of Weeks, 7 weeks with the 50th